It was a few years ago. I remember mentioning something where I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could go away, put us in a completely new headspace, hopefully, and record a whole ass album. And it seemed like a fantasy, like a dream, just abstract ideas. What would be cool, you know? And then eventually you start thinking in more pragmatic terms as you get closer to actually realizing that idea you had. It's serene, and yet there's also this air of uncertainty.
That's it.
Yeah, that goes in.
When Deception Falls was first released in 2022, I didn't find myself particularly fond of it. I was in the middle of an intermittent, sort of transitionary phase in music taste, and I was rather closed off from anything outside of a very specific niche that I made for myself. Because of this niche, I found myself becoming increasingly burnt out with the same playlists and albums repeating non-stop. Then, because of this burnout, I finally began to open up to a newer sound in mid-2023. It was there when I finally decided to move on from the old reliable backwoods and you fuckers were asking for this one, and actually give the rest of Exociety a shot. For the last year and a half, I've only had a song or two from Deception Falls on my main playlist. As with other projects like B-Sides 3, Leap, and Snow Globe Theory, I never really gave it a chance on my first listen. This only changed about 4 months ago, when a YouTube rabbit hole brought me back to the documentary made alongside the album, Into the Woods. For the unaware, Deception Falls was brought about by an experiment with a few of the leading Exociety members, where they rented out a cabin in Deception Falls, Washington State, and lived together for a short period with the hopes of their minds working in tandem to produce an album indicative of the environment. It was a rare instance in which EXO members could collaborate in person, and it really shows in the final product. Even if the approach to the album's creation was very much trial and error, it provides a much more rounded sound in its verses, with each member being able to literally read the room rather than have feedback eventually pop up in text.
One of the ideas that we agreed on really early on was to source a bunch of beats, let's say around 200 beats, from a bunch of producers that we respect, but not listen to any of them until we got here, because we wanted this album to be truly birthed here.
This documentary, courtesy of Carson Tucker of Lazy Eye Productions, provides a good amount of personal depth with each member. You get to see how they interact with one another, their thought processes in creation, and their feelings about the experience thus far. This documentary is pretty damn good, and I'm honestly glad I got around to watching it for myself after knowing about it for so long. The reason I bring all this up is because it had brought Deception Falls back into the forefront of my mind. It's also because of a specific editing decision at the very start of the film, that being the inclusion of the first track from the album, The Lodge, during the very opening shot. I already played it at the start of the video, so I won't play it again, but I think it does a fantastic job of setting the tone for everything to come, both in the film and the final album. Or maybe it does the complete opposite. I feel that every song in Deception Falls can be placed on a spectrum of sorts between weird and melancholic. That isn't to say that every song is either or, but I specify that to kind of narrow down the tone of the album to a definitive binary. It should also be noted that the terms weird and melancholic here aren't definite in the dictionary. They should be treated as vague ideas rather than literally queer or sad, because the album is much more nuanced than can be portrayed in 2 words. Tracks like Sponsor Name and Astasis lead more on the weird end, where tracks like Tread or Live from the Graveyard Soil sit on the other. Songs like Good Grief and 1 Year From Now float around somewhere in between. I have found that, perhaps because of personal incomprehension, I can't put The Lodge anywhere in this spectrum. This leads me to 2 conclusions. Either the song is a complete contrast from the rest of the album, or it's especially distinct because it completely encompasses the album's tone all at once. I'm sure you can humor both ideas to a certain extent, but I believe the latter to be closer to the true intention of the track and its placement. In this video essay thing, I'm going to talk about why it's such a good first track, and how it encompasses the entire tone of Deception Falls going forwards. To do this, I'm going to go over everything about the song, including the production and lyricism necessary for its creation, as well as the curation in both song and album. So without further ado, let's talk about The Lodge. The intro only takes up the first 24 seconds of the song, and yet attributes most of the tone by itself. It begins with this almost ghostly synth track, which falls in and out of tune as it loops on. Accompanying it is a deep drone that seems to warp with the lead, and aids in providing an uneasy feeling. At 12 seconds, this unease is capitalized on by a sudden 808 bass intruding and taking the forefront, pushing the drone back to an even more ambient pad than it was. About 5 seconds later, a distant Vox riser starts before it spins down right before the drop. And then there's the drop. A near soft synth starts just behind the vocal track and quickly slides down in pitch before almost completely fading out. This becomes one of the more prevalent sounds going forward, sitting just behind the lead synth and getting chopped and inserted occasionally throughout each verse. The original lead is gone for the initial drop, but soon returns about a third of the way through Rav's verse to accompany the 808, which now acts as a partial lead. This pattern is essentially repeated through the rest of the track, albeit having a few alterations and switches for variety's sake. This beat is unlike every other one on the album, which distances it further from the aforementioned melancholic or weird scale. Before I go any further, I suppose I should go over the lyricism, starting with Rav's verse. The writing in this verse doesn't have much to really pick apart beneath the surface. I know Rav is often one for figures of speech, but that isn't something that necessarily shines through in this song. It starts with the line, "I still don't celebrate shit," which is most likely intended to be taken literally, that he doesn't find success to be something worth celebrating yet. This could be due to past failures or perhaps just a matter of mindset. The entirety of his verse is extremely self-critical, and he spends most of it talking about his struggles with esteem issues, lack of creating proper goals, and the consequences thereof. He also talks about his mindset and warped perception of reality, regardless of the actual circumstances. He refers to RPGs and fantasy, starting with the line, "I need more luck and I need more poise." Though both luck and poise are generic RPG stats, saying this provides a sort of reference point to his character for those that don't know him. It's also a clever bit of wordplay that lets him portray his lack of structure and fortune while remaining in the confines of RPG terminology. There could be more to it than that, and it could be referencing some specific title or series, but I think anything beyond this is kind of a reach. I also want to bring up a specific line before moving on, and that is, "I'm a vacuum personified in a human body." This is an interesting line, as it can allude to a few things. This line most likely isn't as deep of a cut as I'm portraying it as, but I think it's a good point to discuss something of note. According to Rav, the mouth-eyed character that he identifies with is representative of selfishness and consumption. The mouths for eyes are meant to signify a kind of blindness to one's surroundings brought on by a relentless focus on one's own issues, i.e., he doesn't see anyone else around him because all he does is talk and take. No matter how many times his character's changed between albums and points in his life, the mouth eyes remain constant. The existence and consistent use of this character is indicative of his constant self-criticism, which is often portrayed in his discography. This line is most likely another reference to this blind consumption, a call to the mouth-eyed kid that is Rav, a selfish, overconsumptive, blind to those around him. Or it could just be that vacuums suck and he does too, I guess. It's kind of boring though. Moving on, we get to Bill's verse. This verse is very Bill in the same sense that Rav's verse was very Rav. He starts with a line about ADD and immediately follows that up with one about his poor self-image. Two things he's been talking about at least since Ramona. That self-image line is immediately subverted by a cocky set of lines about EXO and his past projects. He refers to his life thus far, travel, and the Pacific Northwest in the next few lines, before making a kinda dorky call to Trunks and Bojack from the 9th Dragon Ball Z movie. He ends his verse on another self-exploratory note, going over both his beliefs in music, labels, and the like, as well as his life's many peculiarities despite looking plain at a glance. I feel like there's less to say about Bill's verse, but whether that's up to depth or my own understanding of it, I'm not sure. In a way, it's indicative of who Bill is and how he writes. His verse encompasses Bill's character up to this point, albeit in a very abridged, condensed form. Before I talk about Aero's verse, I want to make a note of the positioning in the song. At the time, Aerospace was the newest member of Exociety, with Rav, Bill, and Scuare serving as the three outlasting veterans of the group. Placing Aerospace after Bill serves to divide Rav and Bill, who often collaborate with each other, and Scuare, who often works on his own or with no one important like an Ann Moore. Before Deception Falls, Aerospace only shared a track or two between members of the group. By putting him between these EXO keystones, it served to solidify his position in EXO for the foreseeable future. Well, foreseeable. Righteous speak and symbolism aside, let's talk about the actual content of the verse. The delivery Aerospace uses gives a fair contrast in comparison to the other three on the track. Rav and Bill both use a good number of effects in their vocals, and they and Scuare seem to slur just a bit when rapping, at least here. Aero's delivery is tight and compact, like he's more focused or confident in his lines despite the meaning of them. His lines are also interlinked most of the way throughout his verse. This is obviously prevalent in the first 8 or so, but serves to create a narrative about his life and mind throughout. Lines like "Fanatic of catastrophe, fantastic as the sadness feels, causation or a casualty" illustrate this a bit, as well as the lines "Fell through the dirt, I knew the hurt would move me forward like track to train." I particularly like the second half, starting at "And since I cluelessly elope" for this reason, but also because of the shift to the sort of call-and-response delivery that rarely appears in this project. It makes me wish his verse was longer though. Because this delivery shift allows him to say a lot more in a short frame, it only goes on for about 45 seconds, which is about half the length of Rav's and just over half of Bill's. All in all, I'm sure there's more to poke through here or something I completely brushed past. If you'd like to make an addendum here in the comments, please feel free. And finally, let's finish up with Square's verse. I think this verse is a strong conclusion to the song because of the decent bit of depth present. Much like the start of Bill's verse, it's very apparent what's being talked about from the first line, but he depicts his issue very vividly. He talks about his relationship with anxiety and how it affects his interactions with other people, using lines like "all the shit that I had said and the person that I saw wasn't me," to depict this anxious self as a near complete separation from the real Square. The line before that, "I need to know what I've been doing while I'm at it, I'ma check again and see if there's some reason I should panic," further illustrates the severity of this anxiety. And the line after, "Now I play through the interactions of every person that I've seen," shows how it affects both his past and present self, constantly second guessing what was said or done before. Much like with the other three artists, this verse is personalized almost to the point of becoming a cliche or stereotype of the actual artist. Square's been talking about this kind of thing since Alphabet Soup, and it's the same for the others. The point I want to make in this analysis is, The Lodge is one of the only tracks in Exociety's discography where every artist is completely transparent. Each artist's writing is so indicative of themselves that it provides not only a strong introduction to the album, but to the label as a whole. By being so raw, it not only sets the tone of Deception Falls, but transcends it entirely. It's everything it is because of everything it isn't, so to speak. And maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe it really isn't that deep, and I'm pulling this out of my ass to pad runtime, but I assure you that's not the intention. The Lodge isn't even close to any other track on the album, and that's the point. It's a testament to the writing capabilities of the label, and the lengths they'd go through to achieve that. Even outside of the writing, the placement of each artist on the track serves to debut the newest EXO member on an album, and split the eldest members into their own respective sides. The placement of this song at the start of the album also ushers in a new age of Exociety, as well as telling the world exactly what they can do. I hope I can convey what I mean when I say all of this. The Lodge is one of the most interesting tracks to come out of the group, and it's an especially good first track for the album it's featured on. I said at the beginning of this that Deception Falls wasn't something I necessarily cared for when it released, and now I can say that that's completely flipped. It's become one of my favorite projects to come out of Exociety, and though it may be because of the documentary or just the way it's aged, there's one thing I can say with absolute certainty. I really like The Lodge. Oh my god. Dude, my fucking throat is blowing up. I fucking hate being sick so much. Alright. Let's see if that was a good take.